The morning sun cast a golden glow over London as the city stirred to life on what would become an unforgettable day. Inside Kensington Palace, the Prince and Princess of Wales were preparing for a significant public appearance that would touch the hearts of millions around the world. The atmosphere was different from their usual royal engagements. This time, there was something more personal, more intimate about what lay ahead. Kate stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her elegant navy dress while stealing glances at her 3 children. George, Charlotte, and Louis were getting ready with the help of their staff, but she could see the mixture of excitement and nervousness in their young faces. As a mother, she understood that today would be meaningful not just for the royal family, but for every family watching who had experienced similar emotions. William entered the room, his military uniform pressed to perfection. He walked over to his wife and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. They exchanged a knowing look, the kind that only comes from years of partnership and shared understanding. No words were needed. They both knew that today's appearance at Westminster Abbey would be more than just another royal duty. It would be a moment of genuine human connection with the public. The children gathered around their parents in the hallway. George, the eldest, stood tall and tried to appear confident, though his parents could see he was processing the importance of the occasion. Charlotte held her small purse tightly, her eyes bright with anticipation. Little Louis, always the most spirited of the 3, kept asking questions about what they would see and do at the Abbey. Kate knelt down to Louis's level, smoothing his hair gently. She explained in simple terms what the day meant, why they were going, and why it was important to show respect and love. The young prince listened intently, his small hand reaching out to hold his mother's. In that moment, captured by no camera but felt by everyone in the room, the reality of their dual existence became clear. They were royals, yes, but they were also just a family trying to navigate meaningful moments together. The drive to Westminster Abbey was quiet inside the royal vehicle. William held Kate's hand, occasionally glancing back at the children who were looking out the windows at the crowds beginning to gather along the streets. People had come from all over the country, some arriving before dawn, hoping to catch a glimpse of the family that had become so beloved to the nation. As they approached the historic Abbey, the scale of public interest became apparent. Thousands of people lined the streets, many holding flowers, signs, and British flags. The noise of the crowd grew louder, a sound that was both overwhelming and deeply moving. Kate felt her heart swell with emotion. These weren't just subjects or citizens. They were people who had followed their journey, celebrated their joys, and supported them through challenges. The car slowed to a stop, and William turned to address his children one more time before they stepped out into the public eye. He spoke with the wisdom of someone who had grown up in this world, but also with the tenderness of a father who wanted to protect his children while preparing them for their unique roles. George nodded seriously. Charlotte smiled bravely, and Louis squeezed his father's hand. The door opened and the sound rushed in like a wave. The cheers, the applause, the cameras clicking in rapid succession created a symphony of public affection. William stepped out first, then turned to help Kate. The princess emerged with her characteristic grace, her smile genuine and warm. The crowd's reaction intensified, a collective expression of admiration and support. Then came the children, and the crowd's response transformed into something even more special. People called out their names with affection. Charlotte gave a small wave that prompted an eruption of cheers. George walked with measured steps, clearly conscious of his position but also visibly moved by the warmth directed toward his family. Louis, being Louis, looked around with wide eyes, taking in every detail of the spectacle before him. The family moved toward the entrance of Westminster Abbey, that magnificent structure that had witnessed centuries of British history. As they walked, something unexpected happened. Kate reached down and took Charlotte's hand, and simultaneously, William took George's. Louis walked between them, occasionally looking up at his parents and siblings. The simple act of a family holding hands as they walked together struck a chord with everyone watching. People in the crowd began to tear up. Mothers saw themselves in Kate. Fathers recognized William's protective stance, and families everywhere saw their own dynamics reflected in this royal family's genuine affection for one another. The photographers captured frame after frame, but no photograph could fully capture the emotion of the moment. Inside the Abbey, the light filtered through the ancient stained glass windows, creating patterns of color on the stone floor. The children looked up in wonder at the soaring ceiling and the magnificent architecture. Kate and William guided them gently, allowing them to experience the awe of the space while maintaining the dignity appropriate for the occasion. Staff members and officials greeted them warmly, and the family responded with genuine kindness. George shook hands like he had been taught. Charlotte offered sweet smiles, and Louis, despite his young age, seemed to understand that this was a special place requiring special behavior. Kate's hand never left Charlotte's, a maternal instinct to provide comfort and connection in an overwhelming environment. As they moved through the Abbey, preparing for the ceremony that would follow, the family remained close together. William occasionally bent down to whisper explanations to the children about what they were seeing. Kate's eyes, observed by those nearby, held a mixture of pride, love, and perhaps a touch of emotion that any mother would feel in such a significant moment. The public, watching from outside and through broadcasts, felt they were witnessing something rare and precious. In an age where royalty often seems distant and untouchable, this family demonstrated that at the core of crowns and titles, there exists the universal bond of family love. The moment before they entered deeper into the Abbey for the private portion of the ceremony, William turned to look at his family. Kate met his gaze, and the children stood close. In that brief pause, they were simply the Waleses, a family about to share a meaningful experience together, and the world watching felt privileged to witness even this small glimpse of their connection. The heavy doors of the Abbey stood open, and the family moved forward together, ready for what would become one of the most touching and memorable public appearances in recent royal history. The interior of Westminster Abbey embraced the family with its centuries of history and sacred atmosphere. Every footstep echoed softly against the stone floors, creating a rhythm that seemed to connect the present moment with all the significant events this place had witnessed. Kate walked slowly, allowing the children to absorb the magnitude of their surroundings while keeping them close and secure. Charlotte's eyes wandered upward, tracing the intricate patterns carved into the ancient pillars. She tugged gently on her mother's hand and whispered a question about the beautiful designs. Kate leaned down, her voice soft and patient as she explained the craftsmanship that had gone into creating this magnificent space. The princess's maternal instinct was on full display, even in such a formal setting, showing the world that royal duties and motherhood were not separate identities but beautifully intertwined aspects of who she was. George walked beside his father, his posture straight and his expression thoughtful. At his age, he was beginning to understand more about his family's role and the weight of tradition that rested on their shoulders. William occasionally placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture that communicated support without words. The bond between father and son was visible to everyone present, a reminder that even future kings need guidance and comfort from their parents. Louis, despite his young age, seemed to sense the solemnity of the moment. His usual playful energy was tempered by the atmosphere of the Abbey, though his curiosity remained bright in his eyes. He stayed close to his family, occasionally reaching out to touch Kate's dress or grasp William's hand, seeking the security that all children need when faced with new and overwhelming experiences. The family was guided toward their seats, a process that involved navigating through rows of distinguished guests, officials, and clergy members. Each person they passed offered respectful nods and warm smiles. Kate's grace in these interactions was remarkable. She acknowledged everyone with genuine warmth, never appearing rushed or distant despite the formality of the occasion. Her ability to make people feel valued and seen, even in brief encounters, was one of the qualities that had endeared her to the public. As they settled into their seats, the family naturally arranged themselves in a configuration that spoke volumes about their dynamics. William and Kate positioned themselves with the children between them, creating a protective circle. George sat next to his father, Charlotte beside her mother, and Louis in the middle where both parents could easily reach him if needed. This simple arrangement revealed their parenting philosophy, one that balanced preparing the children for public life while ensuring they felt safe and loved. The ceremony was about to begin, and the Abbey filled with a hushed anticipation. The children sat quietly, their behavior a testament to the careful guidance their parents had provided. Yet they were still children, and small moments of humanity broke through. Charlotte adjusted her dress several times, making sure everything was perfect. George glanced at his father for reassurance, receiving a subtle nod of encouragement. Louis swung his legs slightly, not out of disrespect but simply because sitting still was challenging for someone so young. Kate noticed Louis's restlessness and gently placed her hand on his knee, a touch that was both calming and understanding. She didn't scold or appear frustrated. Instead, she leaned close and whispered something that made the young prince smile and settle down. This small interaction, observed by those nearby, illustrated the patience and understanding that defined her approach to motherhood. Even in the most public of settings, the music began, filling the vast space with sounds that had comforted and inspired people for generations. The children's faces reflected their wonder at the powerful voices and instruments. Charlotte seemed particularly moved by the choir, her expression one of pure amazement. Kate noticed her daughter's reaction and shared a small smile with William, a parental moment of joy in seeing their child touched by beauty and tradition. As the ceremony progressed, there were moments that clearly affected the entire family. When certain hymns were sung or specific readings were delivered, emotion flickered across William and Kate's faces. They were not just attending as royals fulfilling a duty. They were participating as individuals with their own feelings, beliefs, and connections to the meaning behind the ceremony. Their authenticity in these moments resonated with everyone present and those watching from afar. George appeared to be paying close attention to everything happening around him, occasionally asking his father quiet questions. William would lean down, his explanations brief but thoughtful, helping his son understand the significance of what they were witnessing. This teaching moment, happening in real time during such a significant event, demonstrated how royal parents must constantly balance instruction with experience, preparing their children for future roles while allowing them to simply be children in the present. There came a particularly poignant moment in the ceremony when the family was asked to stand. As they rose together, Kate instinctively reached for Charlotte's hand and William did the same with George. Louis stood between them and for a moment both parents placed a hand on his shoulders. The image of this family, standing together in one of the most historic locations in Britain, created a powerful symbol of continuity, unity, and love. The reading that followed spoke of service, dedication, and the importance of family. As the words echoed through the abbey, Kate's eyes glistened with emotion. She wasn't alone. William's expression showed deep feeling, and even the children seemed to sense the weight of the message. They weren't just listening to words. They were absorbing values that would shape their lives and their future roles in ways they were only beginning to understand. When the family sat back down, something beautiful happened. Charlotte leaned against her mother, and Kate naturally wrapped an arm around her daughter. On the other side, George sat close to his father, their shoulders touching in a gesture of connection. Louis, in the middle, looked from one parent to the other, his small face showing contentment at being surrounded by his family. This spontaneous display of affection and comfort was not choreographed or planned. It was simply a family being themselves, and that authenticity touched everyone who witnessed it. The ceremony continued with prayers and blessings, moments of reflection and contemplation. The abbey's atmosphere seemed to deepen, becoming even more sacred and meaningful. Kate bowed her head during prayers, her lips moving softly. Beside her, Charlotte mimicked her mother's posture, learning through observation what it meant to participate fully in such moments. George and Louis followed their father's lead, and in this way, the children were being gently introduced to traditions and practices that connected them to generations past and future. Throughout it all, the family maintained a presence that was both dignified and deeply human. They didn't appear stiff or uncomfortable. They weren't performing for cameras or trying to project a certain image. They were simply present, engaged, and connected to each other and to the moment. This genuine participation created an atmosphere that affected everyone in the abbey. Guests who had attended countless royal events later remarked that this particular appearance felt different, more meaningful, more real. As the ceremony reached a particularly moving section, William and Kate exchanged glances across their children. No words passed between them, but the communication was clear. They were sharing the experience, acknowledging the importance of this moment and expressing gratitude for their family. It was a look that married couples everywhere would recognize, one that spoke of partnership, mutual support, and shared purpose. The children, sensing their parents' emotion, seemed to draw closer, creating a tableau of family unity that would be remembered for years to come. The ceremony reached its emotional center, a moment that had been carefully planned yet unfolded with spontaneous beauty. The Dean of Westminster stood before the congregation, his voice carrying centuries of tradition as he spoke words that resonated through the ancient stones. Kate felt her breath catch slightly, recognizing the profound nature of what was being said. Beside her, she could sense William's own emotional response, a slight tension in his posture that she had learned to read over their years together. Charlotte shifted in her seat and Kate glanced down at her daughter. The young princess's face showed confusion mixed with curiosity, trying to understand why this moment felt so important to the adults around her. Kate gently squeezed her hand, a silent communication that said everything would be explained later, that it was okay not to understand everything right now. This small gesture of maternal reassurance was something every mother in the world would recognize, a universal language that transcended titles and crowns. The choir began a hymn that many in attendance found deeply moving. The voices rose and fell, creating harmonies that seemed to lift the very air inside the abbey. Lewis's eyes widened at the sound, his young mind unable to fully process how human voices could create something so beautiful. He looked up at his mother, then his father, seeking their reactions to guide his own. William smiled down at his youngest son, a smile that held both amusement at Lewis's wonder and his own appreciation for the music. George sat very still, his hands folded in his lap in a manner that showed maturity beyond his years. Yet those who watched closely could see the small movements that revealed his true age. His fingers occasionally fidgeted and his eyes would dart around the abbey, taking in details he had missed before. William noticed his son's careful attention and felt a surge of paternal pride mixed with empathy. He remembered being young and sitting through similar ceremonies, the challenge of maintaining composure while feeling overwhelmed by the significance of it all. As the hymn concluded, there was a moment of profound silence. In that quiet space, something shifted in the atmosphere. The family seemed to draw even closer together, as if pulled by an invisible thread of shared emotion. Kate's hand found William's, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that was both private and somehow universal. The children, sensing their parents' heightened emotion, became very quiet, very attentive. What happened next would be discussed and analyzed in the days to come, but in the moment it simply felt natural and right. The dean spoke about the importance of family, about how love and commitment form the foundation of a meaningful life. He talked about the sacred responsibility of parents to guide their children, to provide them with both roots and wings. As he spoke, Kate's eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide. They weren't tears of sadness, but of profound recognition, of feeling seen and understood in her role as a mother. William turned slightly toward his wife, his own eyes glistening. In that instant, the carefully maintained royal composure gave way to something more honest and vulnerable. They were not performing strength or projecting an image. They were simply two parents, deeply moved by words that spoke to the heart of their experience raising 3 children in extraordinary circumstances. The love between them was palpable, not romantic in a showy way, but deep and abiding, the kind of love that sustains people through challenges and celebrates them through joys. Charlotte noticed her mother's tears and reached up with her small hand to touch Kate's cheek, a gesture of such pure childlike compassion that several people nearby felt their own eyes water. Kate looked down at her daughter and smiled through her tears, pulling Charlotte close for a brief moment. The princess whispered something to her mother, probably asking if she was okay, showing the empathy and awareness that Kate and William had carefully nurtured in their children. George, observing his mother's emotion, looked to his father for guidance on how to respond. William placed a hand on his son's shoulder and leaned close, explaining quietly that sometimes people cry when they feel something deeply, that tears aren't always about sadness. George nodded, processing this information with the seriousness he brought to most things. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, he reached across and took his mother's other hand, offering his own form of support and comfort. Louis, not wanting to be left out and sensing that something important was happening, leaned against his father, and William wrapped an arm around his youngest son. For a few heartbeats, the family was completely absorbed in their connection to each other, seemingly unaware of or unconcerned with the hundreds of eyes watching them. This moment of authentic family emotion, happening in one of the most formal settings imaginable, created a powerful contrast that moved everyone present. The dean continued, now speaking about legacy and the ways we shape the future, through our actions in the present. William felt the weight of these words differently than others might. As someone who would one day be king, and as a father raising a future king, the concept of legacy was not abstract but intensely personal. He thought about his own parents, about the lessons learned and the wounds that still sometimes ached. He thought about the different childhood he wanted for his own children, one that honored tradition while embracing warmth and normalcy wherever possible. Kate, too, was lost in reflection. She thought about her own upbringing, the values her parents had instilled, and how she was trying to pass those same principles to George, Charlotte, and Louis while also preparing them for roles no ordinary childhood could anticipate. The balance was delicate, sometimes seemingly impossible, yet in moments like this, she felt reassured that she and William were on the right path, that their children were growing up with love as their foundation. The ceremony moved toward a blessing, and the family was asked to stand once more. As they rose, something remarkable happened. Without being prompted or directed, the children positioned themselves close to their parents. George stood beside William, unconsciously mimicking his father's posture. Charlotte pressed against Kate's side, and Louis took both of his parents' hands. They formed a unit, a family standing together to receive a blessing that felt deeply personal despite the public nature of the event. The words of blessing washed over them, speaking of protection, wisdom, strength, and love. Kate closed her eyes, allowing herself to fully receive the moment. William kept his eyes open, looking at his family, feeling gratitude so intense it was almost painful. His children, these three extraordinary young people, were growing up so fast. Each day brought new challenges and new joys, and standing here in Westminster Abbey, he felt the full weight and wonder of fatherhood. Charlotte looked up at her mother during the blessing and smiled, one of those spontaneous, joy-filled smiles that children give when they feel safe and happy. Kate smiled back, and in that exchange, everyone watching understood something fundamental about this family. Despite the crowns and castles, despite the protocols and public scrutiny, they had managed to create something precious and real. They had built a family where love was evident, where children felt secure enough to show vulnerability, and where parents weren't afraid to reveal their own humanity. As the blessing concluded, the family remained standing for a moment longer than necessary, as if reluctant to break the spell of the moment. The Abbey seemed to hold its breath with them, the silence rich with unspoken emotion. Then slowly, they sat back down, the children settling against their parents, the parents keeping protective arms around their children. The ceremony would continue. There were more prayers and readings to come, but this moment, this peak of emotional authenticity, would be what people remembered most. It was the moment when a royal family became simply a family, when duty and love merged into something beautiful and unforgettable, when the distance between throne and hearth disappeared entirely, leaving only the universal truth that binds all families together, regardless of their circumstances or station in life. As the ceremony drew toward its conclusion, a different energy filled Westminster Abbey. The intensity of the emotional peak had passed, leaving in its wake a sense of peace and connection that seemed to embrace everyone present. The family remained close, their togetherness now feeling like second nature, rather than a conscious choice. The children had settled into a comfortable quietness, the kind that comes when children feel completely secure in their parents' presence. The final hymn was announced, and as the congregation stood, the voices that filled the abbey carried a different quality than before. There was joy mixed with reverence, celebration intertwined with solemnity. Kate held the hymnal, but she knew the words by heart, having sung them many times before. Her voice, soft but steady, joined with the hundreds of others around her. Beside her, Charlotte tried to follow along, her young voice uncertain but earnest, wanting to participate in this adult ritual. William's deeper tones blended with his wife's, and occasionally he would look down at George, encouraging his son to join in. The young prince sang tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as he realized that everyone around him was doing the same thing, that his voice was meant to be part of this collective expression. Louis, too young to read the words and too little to see the hymnal clearly, simply hummed along, creating his own melody that somehow fit perfectly with the moment. When the hymn ended and the congregation sat for the final time, There was a palpable sense that something significant had been shared. The dean offered closing remarks that spoke to the themes of the day: family, faith, service, and love. His words seemed directed not just to the assembled guests, but to the nation and world beyond the Abbey's walls. He spoke about the example set by families who choose to live with integrity, who prioritize connection over convenience, who understand that true strength comes from vulnerability and authentic love. Kate found herself nodding slightly at these words, feeling their truth in her bones. She thought about the choices she and William had made over the years, the ways they had tried to shield their children from excessive scrutiny while still preparing them for public life. She thought about the countless small moments at home, the bedtime stories and breakfast conversations, the homework help and playground visits, all the ordinary things that made up the extraordinary task of raising children who would someday serve in extraordinary ways. William's thoughts traveled similar paths. He reflected on his own childhood, remembering both the privileges and the pressures that had shaped him. He had made a conscious decision to parent differently, not rejecting the past but learning from it, taking the best and leaving behind what hadn't served him well. Looking at his 3 children now, he felt a surge of hope that they would grow up feeling loved and valued not just for who they would become, but for who they were right now, in this moment. The dean finished speaking and offered a final blessing over the congregation. As his words echoed through the Abbey, Kate reached for William's hand again, and he took it without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, a now familiar gesture that had been repeated throughout the ceremony, each time feeling as natural and necessary as breathing. The children watched their parents, learning without words about partnership, about the kind of marriage that sustains through challenges and celebrates through triumphs. The ceremony officially concluded, and the sound of people beginning to move, to gather belongings and prepare to leave, created a gentle rustle throughout the Abbey. Yet the royal family remained seated for a moment longer, as if needing a few extra seconds to transition from this sacred space back to the public world that awaited them outside. Kate looked at each of her children in turn, her gaze tender and assessing, making sure they were okay, that the length and intensity of the ceremony hadn't overwhelmed them. George met his mother's eyes and gave a small smile, a sign that he was fine, perhaps even proud of how he had handled himself. Charlotte squeezed Kate's hand and whispered that the music had been beautiful, her young voice full of genuine appreciation. Louis, ever honest in his reactions, admitted he was ready to leave now, that sitting still for so long was very hard. William chuckled softly at his youngest son's honesty, ruffling his hair affectionately and promising they would leave soon. As they prepared to stand and make their way out, Kate took a moment to look around the Abbey once more. She thought about all the history contained within these walls, all the monarchs crowned, all the significant ceremonies conducted, all the prayers offered over centuries. To be here with her family, to have shared this experience with her children, felt like being part of something much larger than herself. It was humbling and empowering at the same time, a reminder that their individual lives were threads in a much larger tapestry. The family rose and began to move toward the aisle. Staff members and officials stood respectfully, creating a path for them. As they walked, the children stayed close to their parents, Charlotte holding Kate's hand, George walking beside William and Louis between them all, occasionally touching each family member as if needing the constant reassurance of their presence. Their procession was slow, dignified but not stiff, warm without being casual. They embodied a balance that seemed to define their entire approach to royal life, honoring tradition while remaining authentically human. Other attendees watched them pass, many with expressions of admiration and respect. Some of these dignitaries and officials had attended countless royal events over decades, yet something about this family struck them as special. Perhaps it was the obvious affection between the parents and children, or the way William and Kate seemed to truly partner in their parenting, or how the children, despite their young ages, showed both good behavior and genuine personality. Whatever it was, people felt they were witnessing a family that had found a way to thrive despite extraordinary circumstances. As they neared the Abbey's exit, the sounds of the waiting crowd outside began to filter in. The children heard it too, the distant roar of many voices, and exchanged glances with each other. They had experienced public attention before, of course, but it never became completely routine. Each time carried its own mixture of excitement and nervousness. Kate and William both sensed their children's slight tension, and subtly adjusted their pace, giving the children a bit more time to prepare themselves mentally for stepping back into the full glare of public attention. William bent down and spoke quietly to his children. His words meant only for them. Whatever he said seemed to help because all three straightened slightly, gathered themselves, and nodded. Kate watched this interaction with a full heart, seeing how William instinctively knew what his children needed, how he could offer strength and comfort in just a few words. This was the kind of fathering that couldn't be learned from books or protocols. It came from love and attention, from truly knowing and understanding his children as individuals. Before stepping out into the sunlight and the waiting crowd, the family paused for just a moment in the shadowed doorway. It was as if they were taking a collective breath, preparing to transition from the intimate sacred space they had occupied for the past hour to the very public role they would resume outside. In that brief pause, Kate looked at William, and he looked back at her, and without speaking, they communicated everything they needed to say. They would face what came next together, as they had faced everything else, with love, commitment, and an unwavering dedication to their children and to each other. Then they stepped forward into the light, and the sound of the crowd exploded around them. But they were ready together, a family united in purpose and in love, prepared to offer the world a glimpse of what it means to honor both duty and heart, to serve both crown and family, to be both royal and real. The transition from the Abbey's quiet reverence to the roar of public enthusiasm was immediate and overwhelming. As the family emerged into the daylight, the crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Thousands of voices rose in greeting. Applause rippled through the gathered masses, and the clicking of cameras created a constant backdrop of sound. Yet the family moved forward with grace, their earlier moment of preparation serving them well. Kate's smile was genuine as she acknowledged the crowd, her hand lifting in a wave that managed to feel both formal and friendly. She had perfected this skill over years of public appearances, the ability to connect with people while maintaining appropriate dignity. Beside her, Charlotte looked up at her mother, studying how she interacted with the crowd, learning through observation how to balance accessibility with royal protocol. The young princess then offered her own small wave, and the crowd's response was immediate and tender, calls of affection rising specifically for her. William walked with his sons, one hand resting lightly on George's shoulder. The future king and the boy who would one day follow him moved together, their similar heights and builds making their relationship obvious even from a distance. George waved to the crowd with a mixture of shyness and duty, understanding that this was expected of him even though it didn't come naturally. His father's presence beside him provided the courage he needed to face thousands of eyes focused intently on him and his family. Louis, true to his spirited nature, waved enthusiastically, his young face breaking into a bright smile as he heard people calling his name. His unself-conscious joy was infectious, and laughter rippled through the crowd at his animated response to their attention. Kate glanced over at her youngest son, her expression mixing maternal affection with gentle amusement. Even in formal circumstances, Louis remained undeniably himself, and rather than trying to suppress his personality, his parents had learned to guide it while allowing his natural exuberance to shine. The family walked slowly along the designated path, taking time to acknowledge different sections of the crowd. People had been waiting for hours, some in uncomfortable conditions, simply for this brief glimpse of the Wales family. Kate and William understood the gift these people were giving, their time and attention, and they tried to honor that gift with genuine engagement. They paused occasionally, allowing photographers to capture moments, giving the crowd longer opportunities to see them and the children. There were faces in the crowd that told stories of their own. Elderly women who remembered William's mother and saw echoes of her in how he parented his children. Young mothers who looked to Kate as an example of balancing professional responsibilities with family life. Fathers who appreciated how present and engaged William was with his children. Families who saw in this royal family a reflection of their own values and struggles. Who found comfort and inspiration in seeing that even those with crowns and titles faced the universal challenges of raising children with love and wisdom. Charlotte noticed a little girl in the crowd holding a bouquet of flowers and pulling on her mother's sleeve, clearly hoping to give the flowers to the princess. Kate saw her daughter's attention drawn to this child and gently guided Charlotte closer to that section of the barrier. The staff accompanying them understood and facilitated the interaction. Charlotte approached the little girl, who was suddenly overcome with shyness now that the princess was actually in front of her. Kate knelt down beside her daughter, her presence supportive but not overshadowing, allowing Charlotte to have this moment. The young princess smiled warmly at the girl and accepted the flowers with genuine gratitude, thanking her softly. The little girl's face lit up with pure joy, a moment she would remember for the rest of her life. For Charlotte, it was a lesson in the power of small gestures, in how a moment of kindness can touch someone deeply. Kate watched her daughter handle this interaction with pride, seeing evidence that the values they tried to instill were taking root. Meanwhile, William and the boys had their own interactions with the crowd. A veteran in a wheelchair held up a sign expressing support for the royal family, and William made a point of going to him, shaking his hand, and exchanging a few words. George and Louis watched this interaction, seeing their father treat this man with respect and warmth, learning that royal status was not about being above others, but about serving them. The veteran's eyes grew damp as he spoke with the future king, overcome by the recognition and respect he was being shown. Louis spotted a young boy waving a toy airplane and became momentarily distracted, pointing it out to his father. William smiled and waved to the boy, who jumped up and down with excitement at being noticed. These spontaneous moments of connection, unscripted and genuine, were what made this family so beloved. They didn't move through crowds mechanically, going through motions out of obligation. They engaged authentically, finding joy in these interactions even while understanding their significance. As they continued toward their vehicle, the crowd's energy remained high but took on a different quality. There was appreciation not just for seeing royalty, but for witnessing a family that clearly loved each other, that stayed close and supportive throughout a long and formal ceremony. People commented to each other about how Kate had wiped away tears, how William had comforted his children, how the siblings had held hands. These human moments, more than the pageantry or protocol, were what would be discussed and shared in the days to come. The family approached their car, and there was a collective sense from the crowd that this special appearance was ending. A renewed surge of applause and cheering rose up, people wanting to send them off with expressions of affection and support. Kate turned back to wave once more, and the children followed her example. William did the same, his hand raised in farewell, his face showing genuine appreciation for the public's warmth. Before getting into the vehicle, something prompted Kate to pause. She looked back at the crowd, really looked at them, taking in the diversity of ages and backgrounds, the effort they had made to be there, the love they were expressing. She placed her hand over her heart in a gesture of gratitude that was more personal than a simple wave. The crowd understood the meaning immediately, and the cheering intensified, people calling out their love and support, creating a moment of connection that transcended the usual barriers between royalty and public. The children climbed into the car first, assisted by staff but also by their father, who made sure each one was safely inside before following them. Kate entered last, turning to offer one final wave before the door closed behind her. The car's windows allowed the crowd to see the family inside, and they could observe the children animatedly talking about what they had just experienced, the energy and excitement that had been carefully contained during the ceremony now finding release. As the vehicle began to move, slowly at first to allow the crowd safe passage, the family continued to wave from inside. William and Kate sat back slightly, the tension of public performance easing from their shoulders. Kate reached for William's hand and he gave it a gentle squeeze, a private acknowledgement of what they had just shared and navigated together. The children kept their faces to the windows, watching the crowd, waving until the people were no longer visible. George turned to his parents and asked if they thought the ceremony had gone well, his question revealing his awareness of performance and expectations. William assured his son that everything had been perfect, that he should be proud of how he conducted himself. Kate added that she was proud of all three children, that they had shown respect and good behavior while also being themselves. Charlotte beamed at this praise, and Louis asked if they could have lunch now, bringing laughter to everyone in the car. The vehicle moved through the streets of London, carrying the family away from Westminster Abbey, but carrying with them the memories and emotions of an extraordinary morning. Inside the car, they were transitioning back to being primarily a family, rather than public figures. But the lines between those two aspects of their lives had perhaps never been thinner than they were today. They had shown the world something real and precious, and the world had responded with overwhelming love and appreciation, creating a moment that would resonate far beyond the streets of London or the stones of Westminster Abbey. The journey back to Kensington Palace was filled with a different energy than the morning's trip to Westminster Abbey. The formality and anticipation had given way to relief and satisfaction. The children chattered about everything they had seen and experienced, their observations ranging from the beautiful stained glass windows to the sound of the choir, to the lady in the crowd who had been wearing a hat shaped like a flower. Kate and William listened, occasionally exchanging amused glances at their children's unique perspectives on the grand ceremony. Charlotte asked her mother why she had cried during the service, her question innocent but perceptive. Kate took a moment to consider her answer, wanting to be truthful without overwhelming her young daughter with complex emotions. She explained that sometimes beautiful moments or meaningful words can make us cry happy tears, that feeling things deeply is not a weakness, but a strength. William added that it shows we care about important things, about family and love and doing what's right. The children absorbed this explanation, adding it to their growing understanding of the emotional complexity of the adult world. George was quieter than his siblings, processing the day in his own way. He had felt the weight of public attention, the awareness that people were watching him, not just as a child but as someone who would someday have significant responsibilities. William noticed his eldest son's thoughtful silence and made a mental note to check in with him later, to ensure the boy wasn't carrying unnecessary burdens or worries. Parenting George required a particular sensitivity, balancing preparation for his future role with preserving his childhood innocence for as long as possible. Louis, having released his pent-up energy through animated storytelling, now leaned against his mother, fatigue finally catching up with him. The morning had been long, filled with requirements to sit still and be quiet, challenging for any young child, but especially for one as naturally active as Louis. Kate wrapped her arm around him, and he snuggled closer, his eyes beginning to droop. These moments of simple maternal comfort were precious to Kate, reminders that beneath the titles and public roles, she was simply a mother with a tired child needing her warmth. As they approached Kensington Palace, the family could see staff waiting to welcome them back. The return to familiar surroundings brought a collective relaxation. This was their home, their private space where they could truly be themselves without the constant awareness of public scrutiny. The car came to a stop and the family prepared to exit, but there was no rush, no crowd waiting, just the quiet efficiency of their household staff. Inside the palace, the formality of the morning finally fell away completely. William loosened his uniform, Kate slipped off her formal shoes with visible relief, and the children immediately began talking about what they wanted to do for the rest of the day. The contrast between the morning's public appearance and this private homecoming was stark, yet both were authentic expressions of who this family was. They could inhabit the public role with grace and dignity, and they could also retreat to the warmth of family life with equal authenticity. Lunch was served in their private dining room, a meal that felt particularly welcome after the long morning. The children ate with enthusiasm, hunger sharpening their appetites. Conversation flowed naturally, moving from the morning's events to everyday topics like school assignments and weekend plans. This normalcy was something Kate and William fiercely protected, understanding that their children needed spaces where they could just be children, where the weight of royal expectations could be temporarily set aside. After lunch, William suggested they spend some quiet family time together, recognizing that they all needed to decompress from the intensity of the morning. They gathered in one of their comfortable living spaces, a room that felt more like any family's den than a royal residence. Kate curled up on the sofa with Charlotte, who wanted to look through a book they had been reading together. Louis convinced his father to build a castle with blocks, and William settled on the floor, his military uniform exchanged for comfortable casual clothes, ready to engage in imaginative play with his youngest son. George joined them but seemed content to simply be present rather than actively playing. He sat near his mother and sister, occasionally commenting on their book but mostly just absorbing the peaceful atmosphere. Kate recognized that he was still, processing the day's events and respected his need for quiet companionship. This ability to read each child's individual needs and respond appropriately was one of her strengths as a mother, honed through years of attentive parenting. As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting warm patterns across the room, the events at Westminster Abbey began to feel like they had happened days rather than hours ago. Yet the emotions remained fresh, the sense of having shared something meaningful lingering in the air. William paused in his block building to look around at his family, this ordinary scene of domestic contentment filling him with profound gratitude. This was what everything else was for, he realized. The ceremonies, the public service, the weight of tradition, all of it ultimately existed to protect and preserve moments exactly like this. Kate looked up from the book she was sharing with Charlotte and met her husband's eyes. She saw the emotion in his expression and felt an answering warmth in her own heart. They had built this together, this family, this life that balanced impossible demands with precious normalcy. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments of struggle and doubt. But sitting here now, surrounded by their 3 remarkable children, the challenges felt worthwhile. They had created something real and good, something that transcended titles and would endure beyond their own lifetimes. Evening approached, and the day's rhythm shifted toward bedtime routines. Baths were drawn, pajamas were found, teeth were brushed. The mundane tasks of parenting grounded the family after the extraordinary morning. Kate supervised these routines with her usual patient efficiency, while William helped Lewis with particularly challenging bedtime negotiations about just 1 more story, just 5 more minutes of playtime. When the children were finally settled in their beds, Kate and William made their rounds, saying goodnight to each child individually. They spent time with George, listening as he finally opened up about his feelings during the ceremony, his mixture of pride and nervousness, his questions about what would be expected of him as he grew older. William answered thoughtfully, assuring his son that he would never face these challenges alone, that his parents would always be there to support and guide him. Charlotte received her mother's undivided attention, Kate sitting on the edge of her bed as they talked about the day. The young princess wanted to know if Kate had really meant what she said about happy tears, if feeling things deeply was truly okay. Kate assured her daughter that emotions were not weaknesses, that being able to feel and express those feelings was a sign of strength and authenticity. She told Charlotte that she should never apologize for her tender heart, that the world needed people who felt deeply and cared genuinely. Louis's goodnight was simpler, but no less meaningful. He was already half asleep by the time his parents checked on him, worn out by the long day. William adjusted his blankets and placed a gentle kiss on his son's forehead. Kate smoothed his hair and whispered a quiet blessing. In sleep, the youngest Wales looked even more like the small child he was, free from any consciousness of his place in history or the expectations that would one day rest on his shoulders. Finally alone in their own space, William and Kate reflected on the day. They talked about the ceremony, the public response, the children's behavior, all the elements that had combined to create such a memorable experience. But they also talked about what it had meant to them personally. To share those emotional moments publicly, to allow people to see their authentic feelings and reactions, it had felt vulnerable and risky, but also liberating and right. Kate expressed wonder at the public's response, the way people had connected with their family's genuine affection and emotion. William shared his own surprise and gratitude, admitting that he had worried about showing too much feeling, about whether it was appropriate for someone in his position. Kate reminded him that his humanity, their family's authenticity, was perhaps their greatest gift to the nation. People didn't need a distant, perfect royal family. They needed one that reflected their own struggles and joys, that reminded them of the universal experiences that connect all people regardless of status or station. As they prepared for bed, both felt a deep sense of peace. The day at Westminster Abbey had been more than just another public appearance or royal duty. It had been a moment of connection, of bridging the gap between private family life and public service. They had shown their children and the world that it was possible to honor tradition while remaining true to oneself, to fulfill duties while keeping love at the center of everything. The palace grew quiet around them, the day's energy settling into restful stillness. In their rooms, the three Wales children slept peacefully, their dreams perhaps filled with music and crowds and beautiful buildings. In their own bed, William and Kate held hands in the darkness, grateful for each other, for their children, for the life they had built together against all odds. The morn.